Hello. I recently got another message through my Pensight platform where I welcome family members, adult children, also professionals, and just anybody else who stumbles across that location to submit their question about hoarding. And I say, ask me anything about hoarding. And so recently I got this question. How do you determine the line between hoarding, too much stuff, and clutter? And when does this line matter or not? It's a great question because I think that we really need to consider that this is indicative of this greater spectrum, right? So I think that almost everybody has clutter. Clutter is really kind of this normative experience, the junk drawer, the spot just as you enter your home where you drop keys and mail and whatever else you've brought home because you're too tired or you're rushing to make dinner and those items stay there and that's not their home. Um, so they become clutter, right? And we have these hot spots. Again, a very normative experience in most people's environments. Even in my office, I have a little spot over here where I have a little collection of things that I use during the day. But to be honest, to some extent, it's cluttery, right? It causes discomfort. And so I love what one professional organizer has called clutter, defined clutter as, and really as just postponed decisions. They're items that we maybe use frequently, but we haven't taken the time to really create a space and a home for. And so they just end up places where it's not planned, it's not really a home for them, but they're just kind of there and they bother us, right? So that's clutter, this normative experience present in almost every home. And really, while it causes distress, it's maybe very little, and we are able to continue functioning. That piece of too much stuff, oof, right? Like just that language indicates that that's a value judgment. So, what is too much stuff? And I can tell you very honestly, at least in my own family, every person in the household has a different idea of what too much is based on our values, right? Some people really like to be surrounded by things, it represents opportunities. And so, what's too much for somebody who's more minimalist, who's more experience based, more moment presence based, is going to be dramatically different than someone who's a tinkerer or an artist, right? So, too much stuff. When is it too much stuff? I think too much stuff is when it starts to impede our ability to do the things that we really want to do, we need to do. And so I think that that's possible. But for me, I'll tell you that too much is a very low threshold. But that's me, right? And I have friends and family members who like tchotchkes. They like having balls of yarn and, you know, craft supplies, paint supplies, and they're able to manage that. But for me, all of those items feel overwhelming. So for me, that's too much. Again, it's really a values judgment and going to be very personal. So then, if we can have too much stuff and that's very personalized and values based, when does it become hoarding? Well, the clinical definition of hoarding disorder says it's not hoarding until it's causing distress, it's limiting the ability to do things in the home, to use the main living areas as they were designed easily. And I'm just going to come back and say the other piece that we really miss when we're looking just at the stuff is the first criteria: persistent difficulty discarding. And that discarding word, a lot of people struggle with, but persistent difficulty releasing items, right? That doesn't mean that somebody who has hoarding behaviors doesn't throw things away. I work with many people who have hoarding behaviors who do throw things away, right? That there is a line for them of this is clearly refuse and I can donate or I can toss or I can recycle. Very, very able to do that. but they also have things that they recognize they're not using and that are causing it to be difficult to do things. It's causing them shame. And those things they can fully admit they're not using right now. But this need to save, these stories attached to their ownership. So identity, usefulness, aesthetic, values, again, environmental, memories that I can't let go of. This is sentimentality. This reminds me of this time when, right? Potential financial. I can't get rid of this because I got it for a really good price and it's still very useful. Maybe it's even still new and I can't just release it, donate it. I must sell it. I must find a good home for it. So, this sense of responsibility and financial burden. So, when is it hoarding? It becomes hoarding when there's that persistence difficulty releasing the item, and that causes internal distress. And maybe that's not something that they're communicating with others, right? A lot of people with hoarding behaviors don't necessarily communicate that with others. Why? Well, we see these attachment issues, these common experiences many of them have that people say mean things, people leave, you know, things are safe. And so they don't share these deep emotions and thoughts with just anyone. And that's when it's hoarding and when it requires mental health care when we have attachment issues, when we're turning towards things for our source of comfort, our identity, our security, instead of having a support system, a social support system, where I can say, hey, I'm struggling and I need somebody to sit with me and just to tell me, not to try to fix it, but just to say, oh, yeah, that's heavy. It's going to be okay. Maybe right now it doesn't feel okay. And maybe it's going to be a really long time, but I'm here and I know together we're going to get through this. And most people with hoarding behaviors do not have that deep sense of connection, social support, and they've attached to their possessions and they use them as a sense of emotional self regulation. Okay, I'm just going to be honest. This has been a longer answer than I typically do, but I think it's a really important topic. Hoarding behaviors occur many, many times. That's really this idea that we get more than we need and we have difficulty letting go and they accumulate, cause clutter, right? But clutter itself isn't necessarily indicative of hoarding. Too much stuff is, again, a value judgment. And so, what's too much for me, what's too much for you, what's too much for Joe and Sally could be completely different things without indicating that it's hoarding. When we want to get concerned is when there's that persistent difficulty. When that persistent difficulty leads to such an accumulated level of clutter that we have health and safety risks, significant distress about being able to navigate life, living very small, having things that they want to engage with, but no space to do it. This is when we look at, I think maybe we have a hoarding disorder. And it's really key that it's not about the stuff. It's about the feelings, the emotions, the dysregulation. So many people with hoarding behaviors have a really difficult time acknowledging, naming, and sitting with their emotions. And so they turn to new acquisition, feel better, holding on to, also feel better. That fawning of taking care of possessions instead of taking care of others or being engaged in social support. And that's where we need to get mental health support to help build secure attachment, to learn to challenge that my brain has told me stories that I've believed to be facts or truth that maybe never were. And even as I come to that awareness, that feels really uncomfortable that my brain has told me half truths. And I've lived with that for a really long time. So clutter, normative, some impacts, but really quite minor. Most of us have it, too much stuff, being value based, that I could say in fact, I do say this to myself regularly. I need to go through my books. I have too much, right? Why? Because I'm not using them. But it's not impacting my health and safety. I'm not having difficulty letting go. I just haven't gone over and tried. Hmm, maybe I need to. And then hoarding, which then really gets into persistent difficulty because there's distress associated with the idea of releasing things. I need to save this, if for no other reason than the idea makes me uncomfortable. High anxiety sensitivity, so living a very small life to avoid any discomfort or any risk of anxiety, and attachment to items, reliance on security, safety, and comfort, soothing of emotions through the possession, the identity, instead of leaning into a community, social support. I hope this question and answer was helpful for you in your understanding, especially if you're somebody who has a loved one with what you believe are hoarding behaviors. It's a difficult place to be. And especially if you were a child who grew up with a parent in a very cluttered environment due to hoarding, there's potentially a lot of impact. And I just want to remind you down below in the resources, we do run a monthly support for adult children called SOFME, Survivor of Parental Hoarding and Mental Illness. As well, I have a wait list for my practice, but there are other free resources available. And if you're watching and this has sparked a new question for you, hop over to my Ask Me Anything About Hoarding and submit your question. As always, it's an honor to be able to share this and to encourage those who are impacted personally, as a family member, friend, or as a provider, even. I hope you'll consider submitting your question.